firstly, I'd like to start by thanking Voldemir and the other organisers for the very kind invitation for me to join you today. And I particularly want to give my very best wishes to everyone in Ukraine. Our thoughts are with you at this time, this incredibly difficult time. In my talk, I'm going to offer a critical studies perspective on artificial intelligence and education. So AI is pretty impressive, from beating the world's best player of Go to automatically identifying diabetes from retinal scans and then helping protect against fraud. And of course, ChatGPT, we mustn't forget, and Bard and Stable Diffusion and the other large language models that have exploded into the world over the past few months. And this is just to name a few successes. However, there are a number of different things that we need to think about. We need to think about the limits of AI. And to begin with, there's what's known as Moravec's paradox. And as it says here, it's comparatively easy to make computers exhibit adult-level performance on intelligence tests or playing checkers and now writing. In other words, doing tasks that involve large-scale mathematics, pattern discovery, statistical reasoning, but it's difficult or impossible to give them the skills of a one-year-old when it comes to perception and mobility. In other words, things like self-directed learning, common sense, value judgments are all incredibly difficult for AI. In other ways, there are also myths centered on AI. One of those myths is that AI is better than humans at image recognition. Now, when you, a human, look at this image, I'm sure that you can recognize it as a panda. And the AI agrees with 57.7% confidence. But what happens when we mix this image with some noise? Well, we get this. Now, I'm sure that you still recognize it as a panda. And now the AI is 99.3% confident. However, that it's a gibbon. Another myth is that AI doesn't need people, but that's not true. A human sets the AI's objectives. A human chooses and cleans the data and labels the data. In companies like this, in developing countries like Kenya, the workers spend all day identifying the objects in streams of video. Here's a person, here's a car, here's another person. These labelers are known as the ghost workers of AI. In addition, a human designs the network and writes the algorithms, and AI trains the network, and a human curates the outputs, and importantly, makes the value judgments. And we were told that AI was going to bring huge benefits to tackle the COVID pandemic. But the reality is, even today, AI has contributed very little. As it says here, none of the models were of clinical use. And this is just one meta-analysis. I know of others that say a similar thing. In addition, our increasing reliance on AI actually means that the whole world is becoming increasingly reliant on a small number of big tech companies over which we have no democratic control. And this was neatly summed up by the researcher Timnit Gebru. I'm not worried about machines taking over the world. I'm worried about groupthink, insularity, and arrogance in the AI community. The people creating the technology are a big part of the system. And if many are actively excluded from its creation, this technology will benefit a few while harming a great many. Now, perhaps one of the reasons that many people, especially women and those whose faces are not white like mine, are typically excluded from the development of AI. So in summary, from my perspective, AI is incredibly impressive, but it's not as impressive as many would lead us to believe. So that's a kind of foundation to think about AI in general. But what about AI in education? In fact, AI does bring some interesting possibilities to education. But instead of being yet another cheerleader for AI in education, my focus is on the very many current challenges. You might actually think I'm sometimes a bit negative, but I like to think I bring a critical but constructive perspective. In fact, the connections between AI and education are more complex than many recognize, and there is a lot of hype and exaggeration. But that's why we shouldn't talk about AI in education as if it were one thing. It's not one thing. It's multifaceted, and each connection needs to be considered separately. I like to navigate that complexity in terms of two buckets. Firstly, the application of AI in education, and then the teaching of AI in education. Now, these are two distinct but complementary aspects of AI and education. Today, I'll begin with the application of AI in education, which is sometimes known as AI Ed. There are three types: student-focused AI Ed, teacher-focused AI Ed, and institution-focused AI Ed. I'll start with the last first. So institution-focused AI is most similar to the AI used in many businesses. It's kind of AI for the boring back-end education administration tasks. It involves AI for recruitment and financial planning, and some more education-focused tasks such as admissions or timetabling, learning management, attendance recording, and e-proctoring. And although important and growing, this has probably received the least focus by researchers of the commercial sector. So what about student-focused AI? Well, this is where all the money is, and where the focus has been for more than 40 years, which is why there are so many different types. I'll quickly summarize just a few. To begin with, there's the so-called intelligent tutoring systems or adaptive tutoring systems. The list on the right are just some of the multi-million-dollar funded companies that are already offering this kind of tool. In summary, the system provides the student with some information and an activity or quiz, and how the student responds determines the next piece of information, activity, or quiz. Now, this adaptivity means that in theory, every student follows their own pathway through the material to be learned. And then there's automatic writing evaluation, which has mostly been developed for formative assessment, but increasingly is being developed for summative assessment, particularly in the USA. There's also what I call learning network orchestrators, which use AI to connect people together, like Smart Learning Partner from Beijing Normal University. Now, what I particularly like about this tool, it's the student who's in charge, not the AI. When a student has conducted a class, they come out and perhaps they've not understood something. So they pull out their mobile phone and the app, and they enter the topic, and then they're connected with human tutors, and they can choose which tutor to go with based on scores that other students have already given that tutor. And then they get 20 minutes one-to-one tuition across the mobile phone, sharing the screen and sound only. Then there's chatbots, which are increasingly being used in education to provide immediate support 24/7 to students. At the moment, mostly about practical things such as where's my next class. But also, if you look here, there's Wobot, which has been developed to support mental health issues, and there are many others. Now, so that's a few of the student-focused applications of AI. I could go on for a while and talk about many more. But what about teacher-focused? In the list here are the various possibilities. And until very recently, there's been relatively little AI that's genuinely designed to support teachers. And for me, a dashboard doesn't really count here. For many times I've spoken about this and I've said, but there's very little, but things are slowly beginning to change. So I'm going to go through a few, although I've not been able to find out much about them. And the first one is using AI to create education resources, such as these ones, one on the screen from IBM. Now, all of these still need a lot of work to be really useful. Then there's this tool, the AI Coach, which is basically an adaptive learning tool for teachers. Then there are tools designed to support human teachers as they mark assessments. In other words, rather than the automatic writing evaluation tools that I mentioned earlier, here it's the teacher who does the assessing, not the AI, but the AI provides support. And then there's also tools to help teachers generate lesson plans and lesson materials. And finally, digital assistants for teachers. But that's all there really is of AI tools specifically designed to support teachers, rather than AI tools designed to support students, which effectively aim to replace teacher functions. So having done that whirlwind tour of the kind of tools that are out there and approaches, what are the claims, especially from the commercial sector? And what are the myths that we have to break apart? First, many claim that the AI education tools are intelligent, but I have to tell you, they're not. No AI education tool is anywhere near as intelligent as a human teacher. I accept sometimes they might appear intelligent, but that's a very long way from actually being intelligent. Another claim is that these AI-ed tools will save teacher time. But that claim has been made about education technologies for almost 100 years, and it's never happened yet. Now, I know that most teachers, including me, would love a tool that takes care of their marking, but no AI system is capable of the depth of interpretation or accuracy of analysis that a teacher can give. And what about personalization? This is something we hear about all the time. It's an ambition that's again been around for at least 100 years, which has re-emerged most recently from Silicon Valley. If we can have personalized recommendations on video platforms such as Netflix, why can't we do that in education? But this completely misses the point. Some AI-ed tools might provide each student with their own individual pathway through the materials, but they still take them to the same fixed learning outcomes as everyone else. This is a weak understanding of personalization. It's more like the homogenization of students, ensuring that they all fit in the right box. Real personalization is not about personalized pathways, but about helping each individual student to achieve their own potential, to self-actualize, to enhance their agency, which is something that no existing AI tool does. Education is also all about collaboration and the other social interaction aspects of teaching and learning. all of which is the antithesis of the so-called personalization. And then there are the ethical questions, starting with the ethics of data. Issues such as informed consent. Rarely are the students given a choice of whether they use the system. And then privacy, or is it surveillance? And ownership. Who owns the data that the students create with their interactions? The students or the commercial developers? A recent report in the UK by the Digital Futures Commission found that edtech companies such as Google are collecting unknown quantities and types of personal data from child users during their learning and use this for commercial purposes. But although thinking about the ethics of data is necessary, it isn't sufficient. There's also the ethics of pedagogy, including pedagogical choice. Almost every existing commercial learning with AI tool adopts an effectively behaviorist or instructionist pedagogy, an extremely primitive approach to teaching and learning that involves spoon-feeding information while avoiding failure, and which ignores more than 60 years of pedagogical developments. Spoon-feeding also prioritizes remembering over thinking and knowing facts over critical engagement, thus undermining student agency and robust learning. AI ed systems can also disempower teachers, turning them all too often into mere technology facilitators, someone who switches on the equipment and maintains behavior in class. But good human teachers do far more than that. AI ed systems also represent the commercialization of education by stealth, as education systems increasingly rely on educational tools provided by the commercial sector, including big tech such as Facebook, Google, and Amazon. AI might also have a negative impact on human cognition. There is, for example, some evidence that the use of satellite navigation systems negatively impact human spatial memory. So what's the impact of using AI tools in education on students or offloading learning tasks to students? The point is, we just don't know. Some tools also claim to detect the student's emotional state. The aim is understandable, to move a student from a negative emotional state to a positive emotional state in order to enhance their learning. But using AI tools to detect student emotion when it works, which it mostly doesn't, in my opinion, crosses a final privacy frontier. As does this, the use of AI to monitor or surveil student attention. This technology, despite the picture, was stopped in Chinese schools a couple of years ago, but it's still being developed and used elsewhere, such as in e-proctoring. Now, in the pandemic, exam monitoring or e-proctoring companies saw their business grow massively. But e-proctoring is hugely controversial. It's accused of intrusion, failing to work properly, preventing students taking their exams, and exacerbating mental health problems, to just name a few. They're also easy to get around. In other words, they don't even do what they claim to do. The point is that this is another example of automating poor pedagogic practices, rather than using AI to develop innovative approaches. The thing is that most AI and education developers start with the AI and look around to see what problem they might fix. I think we need to change this around. We need to start with educational problems in which educators and academics are the experts, and then ask AI engineers to use their expertise to help solve those problems. Put another way, most AI and education developers focus on the obvious symptoms rather than the complex causes of the problems that education faces. The symptoms might be severe, such as children not receiving the education they deserve, and using technology might help some of them. But the real issues, the causes, are the lack of qualified teachers and the use of poor pedagogic practices, which the AI tools don't even begin to address. Putting technologies such as AI tools into settings where, for example, there aren't enough experienced teachers, such as in rural areas in developing countries, that's a techno-solutionist approach, which addresses the symptoms and not the causes, which perpetuates rather than solves the real problems. So it's a short-term and possibly exciting fix, but the real problems remain. Here's another example of techno-solutionism. What's the apparent problem? Well, students spend time queuing in canteens to pay for their lunch. What's the techno solution? Facial recognition to automate payments. But the real problem is, how do we ensure all students get a healthy lunch? And what's a human or a social solution? Make the food free for students, exactly as it was when I was at school. By the way, this is from a school in the UK, which was reported only a few months ago, and it makes me very worried about the future. AI ed can undermine other children's human rights, their rights to dignity, to autonomy, to be heard, to not suffer from discrimination, to privacy, and to be protected from economic exploitation. But even if you reject my concerns, if you think I'm making a fuss over nothing, the truth is we still don't really know if any of the AI ed tools actually do what they claim to do. Where is the evidence? The reality is that almost no commercial AI products have been independently evaluated at scale. It's almost all just marketing. I know of one company that was offered free evaluation and they turned it down. What are they trying to hide? If the AI ed tools are so good, where are the robust, independent, randomized controlled trials? There are almost none. And finally, back to the elephant in the room, ChatGPT. Now, what ChatGPT and other similar tools achieve is literally amazing, but they're still inaccurate. They still hallucinate. They make things up. They still get things wrong. And so they need to be used very carefully. And their use in education, the challenges are still being worked out. It's early days. Okay, moving on to our second bucket, the teaching of AI, what some call AI literacy for all citizens, from young children to adult learners. The human and the technological dimensions of AI. I like to use a metaphor, cars. Now, to drive a car, we need to know that it runs on petrol or gas. We need to know what the pedals do and why we turn that big wheel in front of us. Meanwhile, some people argue that we also should know how an internal combustion engine works, what a carburetor does, what a camshaft is, and so on. And most people agree that we also need to know the rules of the road, how to drive safely, and how to take care of other road users. Because in the wrong hands, cars can be lethal weapons. Okay, let's go through the metaphor again and see how this translates to AI. Well, just as we need to know about the petrol or gas, the pedals and the steering wheel, I would argue that everyone needs to know more about how AI is being used all around us every day and the implications. And just as some argue that you might need to know how the engine works, for some it can be important to learn how the AI works, at least to an appropriate level. The AI engineers of tomorrow need to learn machine learning, neural networks, large language models, statistics, and so on, to an in-depth level. But meanwhile, I would argue that children, in fact, all of us across society, should have the opportunity to learn AI works to an appropriate level and how we might create it. In fact, there are many programs around online that do exactly that. But what about safety? I would argue, for the safety of all of us, we also need to know AI's rules of the road. What do we need to think about to ensure that AI is ethical, has a positive impact on humans, human rights, and social justice? Because just like cars, and perhaps more so, AI can be a lethal weapon. Put another way, while the teaching of AI does include a technological dimension, how AI works and how it can be created, there's also the human dimension, the impact of AI on humans, on human rights and ethics, how we can deal with AI hype, AI biases, fake news, and so on. And I believe that the teaching of AI needs to bring together both the technical and the human dimensions of AI interwoven throughout every course. The problem is that all too often, the human dimension is forgotten or minimized or tagged into the last few minutes. Before you go, let's talk about the ethics. So, in conclusion, what some AI tools can achieve in education is really quite impressive. The researchers have overcome some huge technical challenges. In a sense, they've managed to climb this huge mountain. But still, the tools they've developed are very limited when compared with human teachers and contemporary pedagogy. And frequently, they're highly questionable. Perhaps most importantly, they ignore the bigger mountain of possibilities that AI might help achieve. Rather than automating poor pedagogic practices, AI developers need to leverage AI's amazing capabilities to innovate teaching and learning, but without compromising pedagogy or human values. To empower students and teachers, to support inclusion and equity, and for the common good. To be clear, I'm not saying that AI in education are always bad. I still believe there is some amazing potential. But I am criticizing current applications of AI in education and the way things are currently developing. In my opinion, we need to change the trajectory. What do we want our education systems to achieve? Do we just want students with lots of exam certificates? Or do we want independent, creative, and critical thinkers who are able to help society develop most effectively for the common good? That's the choice. And that will help decide the right kind of AI in education. So what I am saying is that AI is amazing, but not as amazing as many people claim. AI is already having a major impact in education, and it has the potential to transform education for good, but if we're not careful, also for bad. We need to recognize that embedding commercial AI tools in classrooms is a commercialization of education by the back door. We need to avoid simply automating poor pedagogic practices. We need to use the power of AI to develop innovative approaches to teaching and learning that address real problems. Thank you very much for listening.